There are different types of people in the world. Some are eternal optimists, and I've always envied them. Me, I'm a perpetual curmudgeon. I will look at the roses and find the thorns in most situations. You might say, well, Amy, I see you every Sunday morning and you seem so upbeat. Well, that's because I'm here. I like being here, and I like all of you. See me on a Monday morning driving to work in traffic, and you'll see a totally different person. So you can imagine I had a bit of a struggle with the idea of joy being resistance. I can't say I've ever experienced real joy. I think I've experienced fairly sound contentment. I asked myself the questions, how can I use resistance as joy if I don't fully understand joy? What is joy, and how can we tap into it? What causes joy? As one does in this day and age, when we don't know something, I hit a Google search. I typed quotes on joy in the present, and this was the first hit I got. The soul's joy lies in doing. That thought captured me. Then I came to this one. I slept and I dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy, by Tagore. I don't know if I agree, but at least there's more direction there. I kept searching. I stumbled on an article by Jessica Boehm called Finding Joy in Doing What's Right, a Relational Path to Happiness. Okay, now we're talking. She talked about the ancient thinkers and two ways to happiness: eudaimonia, I really hope I'm saying that right, and hedonism. Basically, eudaimonia is happiness in the pursuit of virtue and a life well lived. It comes with a lot of words like self-sacrifice and righteousness, words that don't sound like much fun. While hedonism finds joys in pleasures of the moment and instant gratitude. That sounds a little bit better to me, honestly. This is all new to me, so I won't make you philosophy majors cringe by trying to explain something I just learned. However, I was interested in her suggestion that these concepts need not be in opposition, that hedonistic eudaimonia can exist. There are virtuous pleasures. She states, when we act in ways that align with our values, like compassion, honesty, justice, and wisdom, the satisfaction and happiness we experience are deeper and more enduring than the fleeting joys of purely hedonistic pursuits. She states that aligning our actions with our deeply held values and principles leads to a sense of inner harmony and contentment. Alignment between our actions and values ensures that we don't experience inner conflicts or moral dilemmas, reducing inner turmoil and promoting inner peace. This is starting to sound very you. I thought we followed our principles because it was the right thing to do or makes a better society. Dr. Boehm gives us a reason to follow UU principles and values as a way to promote joy and decrease unhappiness. I've also heard Reverend Rebecca state on multiple occasions that living a life out of sync with our values can create a sort of hell on earth for the individual. Hedonistic eudaimonia challenges the misconceptions that pursuing virtue is a path of self-denial and self-sacrifice devoid of pleasure. I always thought it was a little strange concept, but I remember a few sermons where Reverend Rebecca talked about pleasure as resistance. Looking at Google again, I found this. Pleasure as resistance suggests that engaging in activities that bring joy, pleasure, and self-care can be a form of pushing back against systems of oppression. It can be a radical act that challenges societal norms and expectations. In other words, joy is resistance. Okay, I'm starting to be a little bit more sold on this concept now, even for my skeptical self. But we have yet to really get to the how. Good news, Dr. Bohm has some suggestions. I'm directly quoting from the article here because she says it better than I could, and she has a few more, but I picked what I found to be the most impactful. First, define your values. Begin by identifying your core values and ethical principles. What matters most to you? What virtues do you admire and want to embody? 2, set meaningful goals. Create goals that align with your values, whether it's personal growth, contributing to your community, improving your relationships, setting meaningful objectives rooted in virtue provides a sense of purpose. I think that's why I'm so different at this congregation than I am when I'm outside these doors. I really need to work on that. Here is where I do my acts of service that align with my values, so perhaps I've associated joy with this place. How would it be if I transferred those actions into my community? Could I experience real joy outside these walls? Practice self-care. Remember that taking care of your physical and mental well-being is a virtuous act. Exercise, I'm really bad about that one. Rest and mindfulness can enhance your ability to live virtuously and enjoy life's pleasures. This might be why I have difficulty experiencing joy, because self-care is really hard. Reflect and adjust. Regularly assess your progress in aligning pleasure with virtue. Reflect on your actions and their impact on your overall happiness. Adjust your approach as needed to maintain harmony between hedonistic enjoyment and eudaimonic purpose. In a world that is increasingly viewing empathy as and acts of service as weakness or being taken advantage of, we can consider these notions of how acts of virtues toward others feeds into our joy. We can resist the pressure to align ourselves with the selfishness and practice joy as resistance. Thank you.
You won't be surprised that the worship arts team had a hard time with this assignment, joy and resistance. You know what we're resisting. Every day there's a torrent of cruel and stupid in the news. I don't have to recite the headlines, you're living it, you know. And if you've known me for a while, you won't be surprised that I particularly had a hard time. Asking me to lead people to a joyful place is a bit like asking Burger King to milk your cow. But on my drive to work, I got an idea. Stevie Ray Vaughan gave me the answer. He said, "She's my sweet little thing, she's my pride and..." I think sometimes we confuse joy with elation. No one can stay in that state for long, though, certainly not me, which is why I think English invented the word overjoyed to describe it. And as Amy talked about, in Nicomachean Ethics, say that 5 times fast, Aristotle defined happiness not as an emotion, not as a temporary feeling, but as eudaimonia, or human flourishing, which he said is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. So how do we do that in times of enormous adversity? When I first joined this church in 2006, I was soon acquainted with the work of the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, a practical theologian who was then the pastor at All Souls Church in New York's Upper East Side. In a book he wrote that year as he dealt with his terminal esophageal cancer, he said this: "Adversity doesn't always bring out the best in people. But the reason it so often does is because adversity forces us to work within tightly drawn limits. Everything within those limits is heightened. We receive as gifts things we tend to take for granted. For a brief, blessed time, what matters to us most really does matter. Is that true? Around that time, I soon learned a lot about adversity for myself. My wife, Libby, discovered that she was dealing with progressive neurological disease. I was a president of a mortgage brokerage company at that time. The industry I'd worked in all my life to that point completely collapsed, and I lost my business. Shortly after that, Libby lost her job. My dad was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. We fell behind in our rent. We had our car repossessed twice. And there were 1,000 stresses and old wounds and traumas that came due like unpaid debts in that chaos. And it was a terrible time. I wish I could tell you that adversity brought out the best in me then. It didn't. I see some of you remember me from then. I became impulsive and bitter and angry. Any tiny provocation made me emotional. It turned out that I had developed a form of depression with an unusual presentation. And despite seeking help from a succession of well-intentioned mental health professionals, it was years before the diagnosis of atypical depression was made and treated. And then at last I began to get better. I'm not proud of that time in my life. I lost friends permanently. I hurt family members in ways I can't repair. But as I started to feel like myself again, I realized I had changed in ways that were making me a happy person. In the ancient Greek play Agamemnon, Aeschylus wrote, Zeus puts mortals on the journey of comprehension. Let me start that again. Zeus puts mortals on the journey of comprehension and made this the powerful law. We learn by suffering. Pain and trouble we cannot forget trickles through the heart in sleep, and wisdom comes just so to the unwilling. The gods, seated on their holy thrones, bestow a hard grace on us, I think. I kept coming here throughout those hard years. This community was a place where I didn't feel lonely, and I made friends here who helped me with examples, words, and so many kindnesses. I'm different now because of medicine, but also, and perhaps mostly, because of the people at UUCR who helped me to make meaning of it all, who knew I was going through some hard stuff and helped me in safety through that. So we've been sharing writings by the Irish poet and priest John O'Donoghue in this service. Here's some of his prose. When we show compassion or kindness to another, we are setting blessing in train. There is a way in which an act of kindness becomes an independent, luminous thing, a kind of jewel box of light that might conceal itself for days or years until one day, when you are in desperate straits, you notice something on the floor at your feet, you reach for it, and you discover exactly the courage and vision for which you desperately hunger. I hear that, and I think of the time when my friend Jay LaMarche and I spread grass right out there, while Jay told me about his beloved wife's, Virginia's, growing dementia, and listened to me tell him about much of what I just shared with you. Not trying to solve my problems, but just to hear them and caring. Or that minute just before our Christmas Eve service in this room in the year that my dad died, when Reverend Rebecca came up behind me with a surprise hug and said, I know you're thinking about your father. There is a beauty in doing hard things. I can play the piano a bit. Your choice of hot cross buns or Three Blind Mice. It's both the same tune. A bit of Hoagie Carmichael's Heart and Soul. But that's not the same level of beauty of the Andante from Mendelssohn's Reformation Symphony that Justin and Kathy just gave us during Stones of Intention. To do what they did You have to put in the years of practice that make you first an expert and then an artist. Well, I think we can all be artists and experts in our own lives precisely because we're already stuck doing the hard work anyway. The adversity of these times, this is another awful year for Libby and me, maybe you've heard, is going to change us. Don't be afraid of some change. I'll say that again. Don't be afraid of some change. This is my do-over, these horrible, cruel days, and I am going to be proud of how I navigate them. In these dark times, when so much that we treasure is under attack, I believe that we can flourish by living in accordance to our values and virtues. And that is, in itself, our very best protest. So much hurt is being caused by billionaires who did their character building with shoddy materials. Our nation will need people who are keeping love at the center now, because they are the ones who will emerge holding the new gifts of wisdom, courage, and vision that it is starving for. The way out is up. What is life but a chance to grow a soul? Let's do it in accordance to our virtues. Amen. As you wish. This is the way. I love you.
When at our meeting in May, the worship arts team selected the themes of resistance as joy and joy as resistance for our August services, I don't think any of us anticipated how difficult it would be to address these themes just 3 months later. The constant efforts to subvert democratic process, the presence of military on the streets of DC, justified by a false narrative about the city, children shot during a worship service by a young man with a gun that should not have been available to him. What do we do with all of this and everything else? One way that I manage my feelings is that I manage my exposure to the news. I am careful about engaging with online news, and I don't watch television. For me, these forms of media are so rapid, so in my face, so immediate, so visceral. For what it's worth, I take the news at a pace and in a format that allows me to process at a slower speed. I continued to read the print version of the Washington Post. Yes, I am angered by decisions of the paper's ownership, by what I see as biased headlines, and by placement of articles. For me, our president is too often above the fold on the front page. And don't get me started on the recent restructuring that places the Metro section after Style and Sports. But when I dive into an article, I often find the reporting to be more balanced and fair than a headline might suggest. This year, it has been harder than I can remember to engage with the news, but I have committed to reading the paper more fully, and I find that there are two major reasons why. First, I feel like I need to know what's going on. How can I resist if I don't know what's happening? Second, I have been searching for stories of resistance and hope, and I want to share a few of these stories with you this morning. I wonder if anyone saw the August 10th front page article about a group of Indigenous youth kayaking the length of the Klamath River. Okay, a few people read that. The Klamath runs from its headwaters in the mountains of Oregon to its mouth on the Pacific coast in Northern California. And it has been sacred to native peoples of the area for millennia. 6 dams built in the first half of the 20th century had devastating effects, disrupting ecosystems and the lives of people who relied on the river for food, for travel, and for spiritual sustenance. After years of protest and advocacy, 4 of the dams were finally approved approved for removal in 2022. This summer, to celebrate the newly navigable river, 15 young people from the Yurok, Hoopa Valley, Carrick, and other tribes, ranging in age from 13 to 20, kayaked the entire length of the river, spending 30 days on the river and traveling hundreds of miles. Most of the youth had little to no experience kayaking, and they spent months training and learning how to navigate rapids. The voyage down the river was a journey of joy, a rejoicing in the flowing river that ties the kayakers to their ancestors and to the future. I also found joy and resistance in a story published August 11th about the Phelan family who decided to sell their bookstore and leave their home in the town of Vermilion, South Dakota, in order to protect their 10-year-old trans daughter. In 2021, the Vermilion School Board had adopted a policy that allowed their daughter to use the girls' bathroom. However, this year, the state legislature passed a law that prohibits trans girls from using girls' bathrooms. So the Phelan family decided to leave South Dakota. Their bookstore, named Outside of a Dog, was the only bookstore in Vermilion, and the family had developed strong ties to the community. They were planning to close the store when a young trans couple asked about taking it over. They were short on funds, and another bookstore enthusiast talked the couple into setting up a GoFundMe page so all of Vermilion could help them purchase the store. And they raised nearly $22,000 for a down payment. Bookstore customers and friends hosted a loving and very well-attended farewell party for the Phelan family, and they left, sorry that their time in Vermilion had been taken away too soon, happy that the bookstore would continue, grateful for the time they had lived in Vermilion, and looking forward to a new home in a safer location. I was also inspired by the August 21st obituary of Genshitsu Sen, who died recently at the age of 102. Mr. Sen was a grand master of the Japanese tea ceremony and a staunch anti-war advocate who promoted, quote, peacefulness through a bowl of tea. He performed the tea ceremony over 300 times in 70 countries to promote global peace through the art of Chado, or the way of tea. Mr. Sen took his first lessons to become a tea master at the age of 6, and his relationship to the tea ceremony defined his long life. In 1943, at the age of 20, he was conscripted into the Japanese Navy to train as a kamikaze pilot. He served farewell tea to some of his fellow trainees before their missions, and fortunately for him, the war ended before he was deployed. He became a lifelong anti-war advocate and used his deep connection to the tea ceremony to promote peace. These are just some of the stories that have resonated with me as stories of resistance, joy, and hope. I will keep looking for more. I hope you do too. And now Amy and Elsa will lead us in our closing song.